Maybe not. Okay, thank you. So, I'm going to talk to you today about environmental justice. According to Dr. Robert Bullard, who's known as the father of environmental justice embraces the principle that all people and communities have a right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. Environmental justice will be achieved when, one, we all receive, as Dr. Robert Bullard said, equal protection from environmental harms, regardless of race, color, or national origin, and two, people's voices on the placement of pollution sources are heard equally, again, with regard of race, color, or national origin. It should come as no surprise to everyone here today that St. Louis is very, very, very far from meeting these goals. Instead, St. Louis is a prime example of what we call environmental racism. The end result of environmental racism is drastic. It is decreased health, it is decreased wealth, it is decreased quality of life. The clinic has been working on environmental justice in the city for quite some time. I'm going to highlight to you today some of our findings, starting with our statistical analysis of environmental disparities in the city. And depending on how fast I go and how much time I have, I'm going to try to get into some of the recommendations that we think are important to help alleviate these disparities. Now, I'm only going to talk about St. Louis today, but know that these issues are pervasive. They exist throughout the state, they exist throughout the country, they exist throughout the world. Environmental disparities are constant and severe, and they surround us all. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is lead exposure. So lead is a neurotoxin. It's naturally present in our environment. There is no safe level of lead exposure. It is particularly toxic to children. The result of lead poisoning can be permanently reduced IQ, can be permanent increase in criminal activity, permanent increases in violence. It's linked to behavioral issues, increased school dropout rates, increased incarceration, and increased levels of domestic violence. The most common source of lead poisoning comes from chipping lead paint. It comes from our pipes, our water pipes, and it also comes from the soil. Dust in our atmosphere settles in our soil. We grow food in the soil. Our kids play in the soil. But I want to focus on paint. Lead paint was banned in 1978, and 90% of homes in the city of St. Louis were built before 1980. We don't have stats for 1978, but close enough. So you would think that 90% of St. Louis residents have equal exposure to lead, but that's not the case. Black children in St. Louis are 2.4 times more likely to test positive for lead and account for 70% of all children suffering from lead poisoning. People living below the poverty line are at greatest risk, and frankly, that's because lead is a problem that's tied to old, ill-kept housing stock and landlord-tenant housing. You are going to sense a pattern as I talk today. Those are two very, very, very common vectors of environmental toxins. I want to stick with lead for a bit and talk about one of the most maddening issues that I see in St. Louis, and that is lead exposure in our schools, our public schools. Lead is in the paint. Lead is in the pipes. Lead is in the water pipes, in the water fountains, and lead is in the fences. I want to focus on the issue of fences. Testing shows that nearly all, if not all, of the public schools in the city of St. Louis are surrounded with fences covered in chipping lead paint. And I'm talking about city schools. I'm not talking about the bucolic schools around here with rolling fields, room for kids to play. This is a blacktop. This is a playground surrounded by a fence. The fence is essentially part of the play area. Kids climb on these fences. Kids hang their jackets on these fences. They put the hoods of their jackets on these fences and then put the hoods over their heads. In elementary schools, kids chew on these fences, and they are covered with lead paint, chipping lead paint. The city has known about this, or at least been aware that this may be an issue since 2004. There have been reports in the news in 2011, and again in 2021. The most recent round of news reporting in 2021 said that it would cost the city $2 million to replace all of those fences. In other words, 0.16% of the city's annual budget, less than 1% of the city's police budget, to replace all of those lead fences. They're not doing it, they haven't done it. Instead, what they've done is put pieces of paper, this size, on the fence that says caution lead paint. The words face away from the kids. The irony of poisoning our children in public schools with something that is statistically going to increase criminal activity, and then pouring money at the police that are dealing with this increased criminal activity instead of nipping the problem in the bud and maybe not poisoning our kids at the places that they're supposed to learn, is something that is lost on our city. Moving on to asthma. St. Louis is one of the worst cities in the nation for asthma. Black St. Louisans, and particularly Black children, bear the brunt of this problem. Black children are 10.8 times more likely to end up in the ER every year for asthma compared to white children. If you consider that by the numbers, for every 1,000 white children, less than four, are going to end up in the ER every year. For every 1,000 Black children, that number is 44. That is an insane disparity. Making matters worse, Black St. Louisans statistically lack access to medical care, and many public schools in the city of St. Louis don't have full-time nurses, almost ensuring that children's asthma cannot be well controlled. Moving on to mold, and this is a picture that the clinic took in someone's house while we were doing our work. So a woman, she had an apartment with her family. Her son had incredible breathing issues, and this is what was in the upper corner of her kitchen. Mold causes a variety of problems. It can trigger asthma attacks. Mold, like lead, is a problem endemic to old, ill-kept housing, properties that are improperly sealed from the elements, that contain leaking appliances. It leads to mold, it leads to moisture, which leads to mold, which leads to breathing problems. Now, the city collects no data on the prevalence of mold, but what we do know from Citizen Service Bureau complaints is that mold complaints are significantly more common in majority Black neighborhoods. Making matters worse is there is no legal standard for mold exposure. This means that a city inspector can walk into an apartment, see a wall covered in mold, a wheezing child, and can do nothing about it. Cannot cite the landlord, cannot force the landlord to fix it. The tenant cannot force the landlord to fix it. The tenant is stuck with a choice between having a sick family or breaking their lease, ending up in court, and ruining their credit and losing their security deposit. That is not a choice anyone should be required to make. The majority of St. Louisans live in rental housing, and over 1/5 of the city lives below the poverty line. And I'm talking about the federal poverty line, not the actual where you can live poverty line. A lot of people are suffering and have no practical recourse. Moving on to air pollution. Air pollution is a major health concern. Not only does it worsen asthma and damage lungs, it also contributes to premature death, it is linked to cardiovascular problems, and it's linked to adverse birth outcomes. Now, I'm talking about two primary sources of air pollution. Ozone pollution, that's trioxygen, which forms when pollutants from power plants, cars, commercial activity chemically reacts in the presence of sunlight. And it's pretty much the same as what keeps us separate from, the void of space, except down here where we're breathing, where it does not belong. And then particulate matter 2.5, that's small, tiny little pieces of pollution, significantly smaller than the width of the human hair, about 20 to 30 times smaller than the width of the human hair. And it's very troublesome because it can get really deep within your lungs and lodge there and cause significant problems. St. Louis is ringed by 4 coal-fired power plants. And as a general matter, has poor air quality overall, because the air patterns bring that pollution directly to us and then up to Chicago, actually. So that affects all of us. We don't know what air pollution is in different parts of St. Louis. And that's because the state and the government, the federal government, does not collect enough data. There are only 4 functioning air monitors in the entire city of St. Louis, and 2 are directly across the street from each other. So we don't know who is breathing what where. We do know, however, where air pollution permits are granted. This map up there combines race with air pollution permits. And as you can see, air pollution permits are significantly more common, or air pollution sources, I should say, are significantly more common in majority Black neighborhoods when compared to majority white neighborhoods. Demolitions are also a major source of air pollution and are also significantly more common in majority Black neighborhoods. Moving on to energy burden. Energy burden is defined as the percentage of household income spent on energy. Of the 48 major cities in the United States of America, St. Louis places the 6th highest energy burden on Black households. Black households have nearly twice the home energy burden when compared to the normal average St. Louis household. Again, this goes back to housing quality. Poor housing quality is inefficient. It's improperly sealed. It has old, inefficient appliances. In addition to the financial burden of our poorest paying the most in energy costs, houses with old appliances and unsealed leaks are prone to mold, which then leads to asthma, and also excess energy usage due to unsealed leaks and to old appliances leads to increased air pollution, which reduces air quality overall. Food deserts. We use the word food apartheid. It's the same thing. Black St. Louisans are almost twice as likely to live in a food desert when compared to white St. Louisans. This map here combines shows what majority Black neighborhoods of St. Louis and those that live 1/2 or 1 mile away from a grocery store. You may think that 1/2 mile, 1 mile from a grocery store is not that bad. But majority Black neighborhoods in St. Louis also statistically lack access to adequate public transportation, and they have lower vehicle access than the rest of the city overall. So when you think about trying to get groceries from a family of 4 and lugging that in the rain, in the sleet, in the snow, in the cold for a mile or more, that's an untenable situation. The causes of food deserts are 1, vacancy, which I'm going to get to soon. When you have a low-income neighborhood with low population, there's insufficient funds to maintain a for-profit grocery store. And the lack of access to healthy foods leads to obesity and other diet-related illnesses. Not coincidentally, Black St. Louisans suffer from higher rates of obesity and higher rates of diabetes when compared to their white counterparts. That moves us on to vacancy. When I talk about environmental justice, I like to pause at this picture. I pulled this from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch with permission. This is a woman and her daughter walking to school. And I want everyone to pause for a second and consider what your life would be like, whether you would be sitting where you are in the clothes that you're wearing, with the car that you drove here, in the house that you live in, if this is how you started your day, if this is how you felt the city valued you and your neighborhood. I imagine being that child a lot, and it's hard for me. I know I wouldn't want my children growing up that way, and they're not. But that's because my children have options. This child does not. St. Louis is one of the worst cities in the nation for vacancy. We suffer from HyperVacancy, the term is. And 90% of the city's vacant properties are in majority Black neighborhoods. Each of those dots on a map represents a vacant property or lot. You can't see the map of North City because of the number of vacant properties. 25% of all the city's vacant properties are located in just 3 neighborhoods. Some of them have vacancy rates of even 50 or even 60%. The city has invested a significant amount of funds in its central corridor, and the county invests heavily in itself. But the north part of the city and parts of the south part have been left unaddressed, have been left to, in the words of some, to die on the vine. And the city suffers for it. Vacancy also is a self-perpetuating problem. When one house goes vacant, property values start to drop because you don't want to move into a neighborhood that it might become vacant. So then people try to move, but they can't sell their house, or they can't sell it for what they spent on it. So either they don't move and they're stuck, or they leave and no one moves in, and then more places get vacant and more places get vacant, and the property values start dropping. And then people start seeing this as an empty neighborhood, one that people don't care about, and that's when the illegal dumping starts, and I'm going to get into that next. And then the illegal dumping begets more vacancy, which begets more illegal dumping, which begets more vacancy. And it's a never-ending cycle of harm. But the financials of the problems with vacancy are not just financial. Abandoned buildings can contain asbestos, they can contain lead, a whole host of chemical substances. As these properties are left vacant, they're not cared for, they start to break apart, they get holes in the walls, they get holes in the roof, they start falling apart. And then all of those substances, they become friable, they go out into the air and the neighborhood starts breathing it. And then maybe the property starts falling down, maybe it needs to be demolished. The city doesn't do a great job of enforcing its demolition regulations for safe demolitions. All of those chemicals, then when there's no safe demolition, go spread throughout a neighborhood, in people's gardens, in their windows, in their doors, in their houses. These properties also grow mold as they're open to the elements, decreasing air quality and increasing asthma in the neighborhood. And then they're also a haven for criminal activity. Squatters, drug users, prostitution, whatever you think. A vacant property that I'm working on just recently, we had a dead body discovered in it. And that's not uncommon. Moving on to illegal dumping. This is a picture that actually we took in an alley in, I believe, Gravois Park. Illegal dumping, as I mentioned, is a consequence of high vacancy. Deteriorating buildings and vacant lots practically invite it. And when I'm talking about illegal dumping, I'm not talking about someone that threw a can out their car window or maybe just didn't bring their trash bag all the way out to the dumpster. I'm talking about used tires. I'm talking about construction waste, demolition waste. Companies that are that are generating commercial amounts of waste, that are supposed to be paying for the safe destruction, safe removal of that waste. But instead, it's cheaper for them to keep those costs loaded in a truck, drive it over to a poor Black neighborhood and dump it in someone's yard, dump it in someone's street, dump it in someone's alley. They dump it in the dumpster thinking, hey, it's in a dumpster, that's okay, it saves me money. But then the people in the neighborhood have no place to put their trash, and their trash ends up illegally dumped all over the alley. To put a number to it, in 2017, 22,000 tons of trash were illegally dumped in the city's streets and alleys. That's an undercount because the city does not measure how much waste is dumped in vacant lots and yards. By contrast, only 9,000 tons were properly disposed of in the city's transfer stations. And most of the dumping occurs where? Majority Black neighborhoods. And it's a self-perpetuating problem. When people see a lot with trash on it, they dump more. Why should I pay to get rid of my trash when no one cares about this spot? And it's also hazardous. It contains chemicals, lead, asbestos, nails, glass. It attracts vermin. It's not something you want to live near, and it's not something anyone should live near. So I've gone over a lot of awfulness, and I feel like it's important to give a summary, to really think about it together. Lead. Black children are 2.4 times more likely to test positive for lead and account for 70% of all lead poisoning cases. They make 10 times more visits for asthma every year to the ER when compared to white children. The majority of air pollution sources and the majority of demolitions are in majority Black neighborhoods, leading to increased air pollution. Mold complaints are significantly more common in majority Black neighborhoods. The energy burden for Black households are nearly twice that of the citywide median. Black St. Louis residents are more than twice as likely to live in food deserts. The majority of illegal dumping occurs in majority Black neighborhoods, and more than 90% of vacant properties are in majority Black neighborhoods. That is a never-ending and continuous cycle of harm that keeps hitting the same group of people. That's not a coincidence. That is a design. That is decades upon decades of racial laws, racially biased laws, racially biased policy decisions, racially biased spending decisions that decided to prioritize the health, wealth, and safety of white St. Louisans, while either actively harming or simply ignoring the health and safety of Black St. Louisans. And something that I didn't talk about, but the song today made me think about it. Impervious surfaces. We all saw that yesterday with the massive storm. Anyone who was dumb like me and out during the tornado sirens saw streams of water going down our streets. Impervious surfaces are also significantly more common in majority Black neighborhoods. Pave it over. Pave that paradise and put up a parking lot. No place for the water to go. No green spaces to suck up that air pollution, to cool down the urban heat island, to simply improve the view. And if those are the rivers that I saw out in the county, with its gorgeous green spaces, its old trees, what was that like in North City, do you think, yesterday? Combine that with the illegal dumping. Combine that with the vacant homes. It wasn't a pretty sight. So I have a bunch more that I don't really have time to talk about, which is what to do about the problem. And we've spent years trying to figure out, what do we do about this problem? And whenever I talk about environmental justice in front of people that care, well-meaning people who care, the question often is, well, what can we do about it? What can I do about it? What can I do to reduce these disparities? And there are little things that we can do. But the fact of the matter is that these problems are the effect of, like I said, decades of policy, legal, law decisions, decisions in the legislature, decisions in the executive, deciding where money does and does not get spent. And it created problems that are, frankly, insurmountable for regular folks. And it certainly is insurmountable for the people that are living in it and are struggling day to day to keep their lights on and to keep their rent paid, let alone figure out whether that chipping lead paint in the corner is lead or just latex. So really the solution comes from our government. They created this problem. They ignored a massive portion of our population because of melanin. And it takes them to fix it. So if this is something that you don't like and you want to see change, that's who you need to speak to. And consider that when you're concerned about pollution sources. Pollution source wants to come to your neighborhood. Someone wants to build a landfill. Someone wants to put, I don't know, a bus depot. And you say, no, 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 not in my backyard, NIMBY, 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 NIMBY. Well, they're still gonna build it. They're gonna build it where you see all those air pollution permits. They're gonna build it in North City. They're gonna build it in North County. They're gonna build it across the river in the Metro East. Because they don't have the power to say NIMBY. So when you say not in my backyard, you need to follow up to find out what backyard is it going to and speak out for them as well. Because just because it stops harming you doesn't mean that it stops harming people. And since we are getting close to Earth Day, I want to also bring this around to the larger picture of climate change. And I know I'm completely over time, but this is my soapbox, so I'm actually literally standing on one now. So I am going to say it. We think of climate change as this massive issue that affects us all. I mean, we're all walking towards our doom with a smile on our face and our head in the sand. But it's not going to affect us all equally, at least not at first. And when you think it's these wealthy, these super wealthy, or the marginally wealthy, like those in this room that are creating this pollution, we're the ones taking the flights, we're the ones with the 3,000 square foot houses and the SUVs. We're the ones creating the pollution, but we're not feeling it. Because when floodwaters come, we can move, we have that money. We can call a water mitigation company to come fix it up and maybe put down some luxury vinyl tile so it doesn't harm our basement again in the future. We don't feel it, but it's still coming. And for as long as we ignore this issue and just let the harms continue to fall on our poor, on our Black, on our brown residents, we're just stalling the day. Until we all feel the harms that we cause, until we all feel the effects of pollution equally, until our voices are heard with equal strength on the placement of pollution sources and the choices, environmental choices that we make, there's going to be no movement on climate change because the people that cause the problem don't feel it. Thank you. stay here.